From the St. Francis Yacht Club in San Francisco, this is the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, hosted by Ron Young.
Welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, live from the virtual grill room of the St. Francis Yacht Club. We hope that you and your family are safe, sheltering in place in a comfortable environment, and we look forward to greeting you back in the Yacht Club as soon as conditions permit. We're not letting people come into live luncheons yet at the YC, but we are doing these Zoom calls, which enables us to speak with guest speakers from all over the country, even all over the world. And our speaker today fits into that category. Professor of Marine Biology at Cal State Long Beach and director of the Shark Lab. So it's with great pleasure that we welcome Chris Lowe, PhD, to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. Chris, welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to tell you a little bit about some of our work that we've been doing, and I think you might all find it very interesting.
Wonderful. We're all paying attention to sharks, the most misunderstood creature, I think, really in the oceans, more misunderstood than whales even. But tell us all about sharks. By the way, it looks to me like there's two targets for sharks here in this picture, upper left and lower right. Tell me why those are not targets anyway.
So yeah, we do have people and sharks together more and more. And this is something in my 30 years of working in California, I thought I would never see. When I give this talk, I like to preface it by saying, I was getting a little depressed about, the state of our environment and worrying that, an entire generation of Americans would go in the ocean and never have a chance to see a shark. And that, you got to remember, is because we kind of get bombarded with bad news about the environment, right? So we hear about overfishing and pollution and bycatch and climate change and habitat loss and loss of biodiversity and dead zones and oil spills. So we hear about these things all the time. And as a result, you start to feel kind of discouraged, like our oceans are literally going to hell and there's nothing we can do about it. But it was really about 10 years ago that my idea of what was happening to the oceans didn't really match all the rhetoric that we were hearing. So for example, one of the things that we've been seeing along the California coast is more sharks. And I kept asking myself, how is that possible that we're seeing more sharks when we're constantly being barraged every day about how bad our coastal oceans are? So it turns out that may not necessarily be true for many places, including California. And the reason is that California has done a lot to clean up our coastal oceans and to bring back a lot of marine life. And we've fought really hard to do that. And I would argue that white sharks are one example of probably one of our best conservation success stories that we have to talk about. So how is that possible? Well, I would argue that white sharks have probably been overfished off the coast of California for well over 100 years. They were caught in commercial fisheries. So if we go back to the early 1900s, juvenile white sharks were being caught in commercial fisheries all the way up until the 90s, particularly the youngest. The smallest ones, which are found close to our coastline, were the most vulnerable, and they were being caught and killed in commercial fisheries all the time. And there's a good chance that many of you, if you've lived in California for a long period of time, you've eaten white shark and you probably didn't know it because it looks and tastes no different than mako or thresher. The other thing that's probably harmed the white shark population was the loss of adult food. So marine mammals, many species of seals, sea lions, and great whales were hunted to the verge of extinction by the early 1900s. So their primary adult food source had been pretty much eradicated. So it took protection of white sharks in California in 1994. Some serious fisheries management was put in place to reduce bycatch of white sharks and the recovery of marine mammals through the Marine Mammal Protection Act that has allowed not just white sharks to come back, but their food source, which has really enabled the population to recover. So while adult white sharks are feeding on things like sea lions, juvenile white sharks feed on things like stingrays, and they are incredibly abundant off the Southern California coast. So I would argue the reason why white sharks are coming back is because of conservation success. we've done things to improve our coastal ocean. So here's a picture of a white shark. This is obviously not California. This is South Africa. But you can see this is probably about a 16-foot white shark launching out of the water to attack a fur seal, right? And fur seals are preferred prey in places like South Africa. But they're not the only thing that eat marine mammals. So in the California coast, we not only have white sharks that eat marine mammals, but we also have orca. And there are both transient pods of orca, and there are also what we call offshore pods that focus on eating sharks. And some of those offshore pods of orcas are the only thing we know in the ocean that are capable of taking down an adult white shark.
How big are orcas?
Orcas probably get to be about 15, 16 feet long as well. But orcas are in a whole different group. They're a mammal. So they're highly social, they're warm-bodied, they're very intelligent, and they can communicate well underwater. So unlike a white shark that's kind of like a solitary hunter, orcas work in groups. And that's what gives them probably a big advantage in taking down an adult white shark. But if we look at seal and sea lion populations in California, we've seen some tremendous recovery. In fact, another conservation success story. So the northern elephant seal was hunted throughout California for its oil, which back in the late 1800s, early 1900s was used to light many of the homes, right? So this was the primary source of lighting. So northern elephant seals were hunted to the verge of extinction by the early 1900s. Protection really didn't go in place until the 70s. And now we can see the population has been steadily increasing. It's estimated that there are now over 180,000 animals that might have been down to as few as 16 throughout the entire Pacific for the northern elephant seal population.
16 animals or 16,000?
16 animals. So they had literally been decimated. Now, when we look at all the places where northern elephant seals are known to have rookeries, this is where they haul out to molt. This is where they lose their fur, grow back new fur, or they mate and give birth to their young. We see that places like Point Reyes, the Farallones, Año Nuevo, San Simeon, now off Vandenberg Air Force Base, and throughout the Channel Islands, even Guadalupe Island off Baja, are the best known rookeries historically. And while the animals were wiped out, we're starting to see recolonization of many of these areas by these populations that are recovering. So remember, northern elephant seals are by far the adult white shark's favorite seal to eat. Think of them as the Five Guys of the cheeseburger, and they're by far their true favorite because they have a greater fat content and the young are actually bigger, easier targets. Now, when we look at harbor seals, which are also a really common species along our coast, fairly residential, they're not very migratory, we see that their populations too have shown steady increase over time, but have kind of plateaued since their protection in the 70s. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that they weren't interacting with too many commercial fisheries like many of the other species. And because they're so coastal, their food sources were a little bit better protected, but it limits them in terms of their population growth. Now, white sharks will eat these. These are actually pretty good. They're not nearly as big as an elephant seal as a meal, but they're still a pretty good meal for an adult white shark.
Compare the size of the two.
So northern elephant seals, 3,000 pounds. These things can get enormous. The bulls can get, 15, 16 feet long. So they're highly migratory. They'll migrate out to the middle of the North Pacific, overwinter out there before returning back to some of these rookery beaches to molt and then to mate. Now, we know about harbor seal.
How big is a harbor seal?
So harbor seals only get to be about 5 or 6 feet long, maybe a couple hundred pounds. But remember, probably 60 or 70 of those pounds are good blubber, right? That's the good fatty stuff that the white sharks like to eat. So we can see that their rookeries are all around the San Francisco area. There's some big rookeries up there, big rookeries in Elkhorn Slough, Point Lobos. We now have some big rookeries down in Southern California, and then one small one off La Jolla. So these are all the areas where these animals haul out. These are some of the big pockets of that growing population. But when we get to California sea lion, now we're looking at a serious recovery. So here's a population that was probably driven down to as few as 3,000 animals. They weren't hunted for their oil because they didn't have a lot of oil. They were used occasionally as dog food, but they were primarily killed because they were viewed as competitors for commercial fishers. So if fishermen saw them, they simply shot them. So by the early 1920s, it was estimated that there might have been as few as 3,000 left in all of the Pacific. So this population has shown tremendous population growth. In fact, it's now estimated that there are between 300 and possibly 400,000 California sea lions on the planet. And you can see that this population has grown particular in certain areas. So we've learned that a lot of the rookeries have been in Southern California and throughout Mexico, but the biggest rookeries are the Northern Channel Islands off Southern California. So between San Nicolas, San Miguel, and Santa Rosa Island, that's probably 2/3 of that entire population are here during the summer, during their breeding season. Now, male California sea lions are highly migratory. They'll migrate all the way up to Central California coast, even Washington and Oregon, before they'll migrate back to Southern California for breeding season. Females are fairly residential. So what this means is now we're starting to see more aggregations, particularly in the southern part of the Central California coast and the northern part of the Southern California coast. And then, of course, we have southern sea otters. So southern sea otters found throughout California all the way up to Washington and Oregon. Their populations were hunted for a different reason. They were hunted for their fur. And as a result, their populations got decreased pretty significantly. They were listed as threatened and endangered species on both the state and federal endangered species list. And basically, their populations have shown steady signs of increase and movement south along the habitat that they were known to occupy. And in recent years, we've been seeing greater mortality of sea otters because of juvenile white sharks. So imagine a white shark thinking, okay, I'm learning how to feed on marine mammals. I'm about 10 or 11 feet long. These are a better prey item. Those seals, sea lions, they have big fat layers. I'm going to get a good meal. Now they see this thing floating on the surface. They go up, they take a bite out of it. But these things don't have a blubber layer. What they have is very, very thick fur. So now you have a very disappointed shark on your hands. Instead of getting a Five Guys cheeseburger, basically it didn't even get the bun. It's basically a big giant hairball. So while they'll bite and quite often mortally wound these sea otters, they're not really eating them because they're of very little nutritional value. So what do we know about the distribution of white sharks? What we've learned is that adults typically are found around our offshore islands, particularly in the late summer through the winter months, and then along the Central California coast, off Morro Bay, those locations, all the way up to Point Reyes, is typically where we've seen adult white sharks. It's in Southern California, particularly along the Southern California coastline, that we see juveniles. And what we've learned from that is that this area in Southern California, the Southern California Bight, south of Point Conception, is known as the nursery for white sharks throughout the whole Northeast Pacific. So some of those adult white sharks, the females, return in the spring to give birth to their young somewhere. We don't know where they actually give birth. We just know that these very small young white sharks start showing up off our beaches starting around April and are here till about October, November. And then once our water temperatures get too cold, that drives a southern migration for the smallest of these white sharks.
What size? Give me the size of small and big.
So a baby white shark is born at about 4.5 feet long. A female reaches sexual maturity at about 12 to 14 feet. She'll give birth to anywhere from 2 to 15 babies at a time, about every other year. White sharks are known to live to be about 70 years old. Males mature probably a little smaller. Males mature around 10 or 11 feet. Females can get as large as 20 feet, and females can get larger than males, which is common among most sharks. One of the things that we've been doing to try to look at how the shark population is increasing is by studying bites on seals and sea lions. So the marine mammal protection centers, the stranding centers, have been collecting data on stranded seals with shark bites dating back to 2006. So we've been going through that database for the West Coast, particularly for California. And what you can see here is the number of seals and sea lions reported or collected from the recovery centers dating back to 2006. And you can see a steady increase in the number of seals and sea lions being recovered with large shark bites taken out of them. Now, not all these bites are created by white sharks. We believe some of these are caused by mako sharks, but you can see that California sea lions constitute the bulk. But again, they're the most predominant seal we have in our waters. When we look at locations of where these occur, you'll see that, not surprisingly, a majority of these occur in kind of the southern part of the Central California coast or down into Southern California. And we believe a lot of that is because that's where a bulk of the rookeries are, right? So from San Francisco south. So the Northern California, there are fewer bites reported, but there's probably fewer white sharks up there because a lot of the bites are occurring in areas where the seals are aggregating, and that's usually at their rookeries. So when we look at the months where these bites occur, it kind of matches when the animals are in at their rookery sites. So we see a peak usually starting around May, which is when the animals are coming in to start their molt. And then they'll breed in these late summer seasons for sea lions. And then for northern elephant seals, that season is starting to end around February. So we see a peak in this shark bite activity during the summer months when a lot of these animals are at these aggregation sites.
So shark bites, biting what? What kind of targets?
So those are shark bites on seals or sea lions. So those are the ones that strand on the beach that
Right.
people call and say, oh, there's a wounded seal on the beach. Can somebody come take care of it? And the marine mammal care centers come and collect those animals. Sometimes they have to be euthanized. Sometimes they can be rehabilitated and re-released.
Why doesn't the shark eat the whole mammal that it bit?
So that's a big question. Why are they bitten and not consumed? And that's because those animals are really good at evading the sharks. So even though there can be a really bad bite, sometimes those seals can do a lot of damage to the sharks with those big canines. So if you've ever seen a sea lion grin, you'll know that their canines are larger than a wolf or a bear. They are very big canines, and they can do a lot of damage to a white shark as well. So we think sometimes those seals get bitten and the shark's coming back to finish them off, but the seal is able to defend itself and make it back to the beach, where sometimes they just die of the mortal wound, or sometimes they get recovered and can heal. So I've seen animals completely missing their back flippers heal from those wounds and survive. Nonetheless, we've been able to use those records to look at an increase in the white shark population over time. The other records that we have to show that the white shark population is increasing is based on sightings. So in Southern California, we work with all the lifeguards throughout the California, ocean lifeguards, who keep track of shark sightings along beaches. And what they've told us is in the last 10 years, there's been a 5-fold increase in white shark sightings along public beaches. In addition, you have to remember that, at least in Southern California, we have one of the most heavily populated coastlines in the world. And we have one of the most actively used recreation habitats in the world. There are 20 million people that live between San Diego and Santa Barbara. So you can imagine the number of people that are using the ocean for recreation year round. That includes surfing, swimming, stand-up paddleboarding, bodyboarding, wading, surf fishing, and of course, tons and tons of boating. So in Southern California in particular, we have a lot of people that are in the water all the time, year round, and with these sharks. As a result of increased shark activity, we've also noted that there's been an increase in beach closures as the result of shark sightings, particularly white shark sightings. However, there was no scientific data to indicate whether shark sightings actually resulted in increased risk. Nonetheless, when you close a public beach during the summer on the 4th of July weekend, that is going to have economic impacts to these communities. And there's no data on what the magnitude of that economic impact is. So what we do know is that the shark population appears to be increasing, largely because of conservation. There are more people going in the water than ever before for ocean recreation, and they're spending more time in the water. Therefore, you would expect more people, more sharks, there should be more shark bites. However, we are not seeing that. What we're actually seeing is a decrease in the per capita bite rate. The question comes down to when bites occur, it does make a big media splash. And the time of year where bites occur in California can dictate how much impact that can have on a local community. So for example, we've found when there are bites in the spring, that media goes national, and it can result in severe economic impacts to a coastal community. So we don't know the extent of that or the magnitude of that. We just know that it varies by season. When bites happen in the winter, it doesn't make as much national news, and therefore it has a lower economic impact. But again, we don't know the magnitude of that. What we do know is that lifeguards who are on the front lines that have to deal with this, and game wardens, basically don't have enough information about shark behavior and biology to adequately manage these situations. In other words, we don't know what the risk is for having white sharks off a beach. And every time you close a beach, you cause economic impacts. Are you doing that needlessly, or is there a valid scientific reason that you need to pull people out of the water? So the problem was they just didn't have enough information to make good management decisions. One of the things that we're learning and have been learning from some of our research over the last few years is that we know that Southern California is a nursery. We know that young white sharks start showing up off our beaches between April and October. And we've learned from both historic fishing records and from our tagging data that there are hotspot nursery areas that occur every summer throughout Southern California. So these areas include Santa Barbara, off Ventura, Santa Monica Bay, Long Beach, Huntington Beach, Dana Point, and now off northern San Diego County, all the way down to the Coronado Beach, Coronado. So the bottom line is, again, juveniles are using Southern California beaches, but it's rare to see adult white sharks off Southern California beaches. We predominantly see juveniles. And when we do see them, they're spending extensive periods of time using particular beach habitats. So here we have about a 7-foot juvenile white shark, probably about a 2 or 3 year old, hanging out literally less than 100 feet from the shoreline. We see this at public beaches with lots of people. We see this at more remote beaches with fewer people. So in order to answer questions about why are these sharks choosing these beaches? How much time do they spend there? What are they doing while they're there? When are they going to leave? We at the Shark Lab use a variety of technology to answer those questions. So one type of tool we use are called spot tags. These are satellite tags that if we catch the shark, we can bolt this transmitter onto the shark's dorsal fin. And every time the fin breaks the surface, that radio transmitter is transmitting to satellites in orbit. And then what will happen is it will send me an email to my office, giving me the time, the date, the latitude and longitude, and the ID number of that shark. However, this technology uses radio waves which do not penetrate through seawater. So the minute that shark goes underwater, the transmitter stops transmitting. So the only time we get an accurate latitude and longitude is when the fin breaks the surface. Now, sharks are not like marine mammals. They don't have to come to the surface to breathe. So if we want to get more information, we use another type of tag called a pat tag. This tag can get darted into the shark's back, hangs off like an earring. It's designed to float. It's got a temperature sensor, a depth sensor, and a light sensor, and it's recording temperature, light, and depth every 30 seconds to 5 minutes. And then we can program this to pop off that shark at pre-described time and date where it floats to the surface and then uploads all that data to the satellites, which then downloads it to me in my office. So now, like ancient mariners, we can use light levels to calculate day length. We can use a really accurate clock in that to estimate latitude and longitude. Now, unlike a sextant, it's not terribly accurate. It gives us about a 60 nautical mile area where that shark could be. And of course, as we get closer to the equinox or closer to the equator, the error gets greater. So it doesn't give us a really accurate estimate of the geoposition of the shark. What it does give us is a really accurate estimate of the temperature and the depth of the water that shark moved through. Now, if we want to know how close a shark gets to a beach, we use this other technology called acoustic telemetry. So instead of using radio waves, these transmitters are using sound, lower frequency sound that travel really well through seawater. Now, if we catch the shark, we can flip that shark over, put it into what we call tonic immobility, it goes to sleep. We can surgically implant one of these acoustic transmitters into the shark's body cavity, stitch it up, and let that shark go. Now, these transmitters have a 10-year battery life. We can track an individual basically from infancy almost to adulthood. Each transmitter has a unique ID code. Now, when that shark with a transmitter swims within 300 yards of one of our underwater acoustic receivers, which are located all on the coast, about 100 yards off the beach, it will record the time, the date, and the ID number. So think of this like Easy Pass on the toll road, that counts how many times you drive down the road. This technology works very much like that and enables us to monitor how much time these sharks spend in close proximity to a beach. The fourth type of technology we use gives us really high resolution data. These are called smart tags. This smart tag gets clamped onto the shark's dorsal fin like a little backpack, stays on there for 24 to 48 hours, and gives us really high resolution data like a Fitbit. And I'm going to talk more about the kind of data that we can get from those later. So as you can see, we've been able to tag a lot of sharks with this very expensive, high-tech technology that's enabled us to start to answer some of those questions. So in order to get this technology into sharks or onto sharks, we have to get close enough to them. So we use a variety of techniques. One technique that we used in the early days was relying on commercial fishermen that accidentally catch sharks in their nets. Call us up and say, hey, listen, I caught a baby white shark in my net. I'm going to be back at the dock in an hour. Can you meet me there? My team and I would race there. We'd meet the fishermen. We could get measurements of the sharks. We could take pictures. We could take tissue samples for genetic analysis. We could fit the sharks with a variety of these types of transmitters, take the shark out offshore, let them go, and see where they go. Now, the problem that we have with this technique is the fishermen have to fish outside 3 miles. It's illegal to fish gill nets inside 3 miles. And we had to wait for fishermen to catch them and call us. But we were starting to have records of sharks being seen very close to shore. So the other technique we used was working with lifeguards. We could get in on a lifeguard jet ski. So here you can see one of my grad students on the back of a lifeguard jet ski. We're using a drone to spot. They can tell the lifeguard where the shark is. We can dive in and we can dart a tag in the shark's back. And because these juvenile white sharks form these aggregations, you're now seeing the student standing. That's how shallow these sharks are when they're in that close to the shoreline. And we could tag half a dozen sharks in a couple hours time using this technique. Now, some of the sharks are a little too big to jump in the water with, like this juvenile here. We can drive up alongside them with a boat. The sharks stay right at the surface. If we're nice and quiet, we can dart an acoustic transmitter or a pop-off satellite transmitter into their back. And then we can use the drone to estimate the size of that shark relative to the pole spear, the size of the boat. The other technique we use is called strike netting. And this is if we can see the shark swimming along the beach, we can put a piece of gill net right in front of that shark and entangle that individual, then quickly pull that shark out of the net and process it, much like we would if we got it from a commercial fisherman. So to give you an idea about some of the behaviors that we've learned using some of this technology, I'm going to show you something that we've learned about the migratory patterns of these young white sharks. Here is a juvenile white shark. This was a baby caught in 2007 off Ventura. And the shark was fitted with a pop-off archiving satellite tag. So what you're going to see is a black smudge. Somewhere in the middle of that black smudge is the geo position of that shark. And what you're going to see is a time and date counter up here, and you're going to see sea surface temperature. So red is warm, blue is cold. So what you'll see is here we are in the summer, the shark is hanging out off Southern California where it was tagged. And as we start to get to September, October, water temperature is starting to drop. And that was a cue that initiated this southern migration of the shark down into Baja waters. Now, prior to 2015, pretty much every shark we tagged showed this winter migration. And a lot of the sharks ended up in this area off Vizcaíno Bay. So this is Scammons Lagoon down in here, right? This is where the gray whales go and give birth to their young. And we found that many of these juvenile white sharks were overwintering in this area. Now, we had an opportunity to do a cool experiment. So a lot of this research was originally funded by Monterey Bay Aquarium. So we had a white shark that was caught the same year in 2007 off Ventura, but this white shark was taken all the way up to Monterey, kept at Monterey Bay Aquarium for 5 months. This little shark gained almost 100 pounds in 5 months and was growing so fast. The aquarists were worrying that it was starting to jump in the tank. So they elected to release it in Monterey in February, where the water temperature is more like 50 degrees in the winter. And what you'll see here is that baby white sharks do not like cold water. So they can tolerate it, but that drove this shark all the way down to Mazatlan. And then what we see is in the spring, we see the slug of warm water that comes up all the way into the Gulf of California, and it drove the shark up into the Gulf. And then right before this tag was programmed to pop off, we found the shark hanging out at a depth of about 120 feet, where the water temperature was more like 68 degrees, but the surface water temperatures were 82 degrees. So what these little experiments from these Monterey released sharks showed us was that these baby white sharks don't like water too cold, but they also don't like it too warm. And those temperature regimes are what are regulating their annual migrations. So if we want to know how much time these juvenile white sharks are spending along our beaches, this is where we use our acoustic telemetry technology. So the dots that you see are locations of receivers along beaches. And we have collaborators like the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary are our partners in this research. They have a bunch of receivers around the Channel Islands. Monterey Bay Aquarium has some receivers off Monterey. And then, of course, we have some receivers up off Morro Bay, all the way down to the Mexican border. And then I have colleagues in Mexico that also have receivers all throughout Vizcaíno Bay and Scammons Lagoon. So what we've learned from our tagging data is that there are these Southern California hotspots, but they shift from year to year, and we don't know why. So for example, in 2010 to 2012, this area off Santa Monica Bay, Will Rogers Beach, was the hotspot for the summer. This is the only place we really saw or detected juvenile white sharks. And then in 2013 to 15, Manhattan Beach became the hotspot. Then in 2015 to 2016, Belmont Shore off Long Beach and Surfside off Huntington Beach became the hotspot. 2017 to 2018, off Dana Point and San Clemente became the hotspot. And then in 2018 to now, Carpinteria and Santa Barbara became a hotspot, as well as Del Mar and Solana Beach and Coronado. So what we have seen is that these hotspot areas change from year to year. Sharks will hopscotch from these hotspot areas, but any given summer, we're going to see a different hotspot being used, and we don't know how sharks are making those decisions. So I'm going to show you an animation from sharks that we tagged in 2020. We managed to tag almost 50 sharks. And what you're going to see is a time and date counter here. So this is during the winter. This is in February. And you can see sharks, these are large juveniles, probably in the 8 to 10 foot range, are moving back and forth between Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, Morro Bay. And then as we get into the summer, we start seeing more small sharks showing up that we tag. And we see them spending more time in this area off Santa Barbara, Carpinteria. But at the same time, the larger juveniles are moving back and forth between some of these hotspot areas. So you can see over time that they're shifting between some of these hotspots. And what we see is by the time these sharks are about 2 years old, they are now able to go to the offshore islands and then also make this turn around Point Conception and go into cooler water up off the Central California coast. So one of the challenges that we have, and one of the complaints that the lifeguards had, was it takes my team about a month for divers to go download, pick up all those acoustic receivers that are off the beaches. And we would tell lifeguards, oh, by the way, 2 weeks ago, there was a 9-foot white shark off your beach. And they would go, well, thank you, but that's not really helpful. We need to know when they're off our beach now. So we worked with the manufacturer to develop these new buoys that have acoustic receivers underneath the buoys. They're cabled. They have a cell modem. They have basically a GPS on them. And anytime a tag shark swims within 300 yards of one of the buoys, the buoy will then send a text alert to lifeguards. So they get real-time detection data. In addition, they get information about that shark. How big is that shark? When was it tagged? Where was it tagged? Where has it been? And how long has it been by your buoy? So now the lifeguards can use that information to make better decisions on what to do about their beaches. So eventually we hope to have basically public portals that the public can see this, but we always have to warn people we can't tag every shark. So just because you're not getting any detections at a buoy doesn't mean there aren't any white sharks there. This is a science tool. It helps us understand the behavior of these animals. So here are what some of the data look like. This is from a buoy up off Carpinteria. You can see some sharks are by this buoy during day and night. Others are only by it during certain times of day. The sharks are constantly moving back and forth along these beaches. Here's what the software looks like for the lifeguards. These indicate some of the locations of our buoys. Each tile is a shark. It tells them what sharks were detected and how long ago they were detected, how many detections, and on what hub were they being detected. Gives them summary data, gives them environmental data. So these buoys now have 6 buoys along our coast. We're trying to grow our buoy array, and it gives the lifeguards better, more current data. And it's actually cheaper for us than sending teams out diving all along the Southern California coast to pick up and download those receivers. So the number one question we get are, why are the sharks at my beach? How long are they going to be here? So we have 3 hypotheses as to why juvenile white sharks use beaches. One, believe it or not, is for safety. So we don't know where white sharks give birth. We just know babies show up off our beaches. And what we have to remember is they get no parental care. They get no instruction from mom. So we think they're being born in a nice warm mom. The moms probably give birth to them in deeper water. They don't like cold water. And the other reason why they move into the shoreline is because the water's warmer. Now, if they're going to use these beaches because they're shallower and there are less potential predators or threats there, they need to be able to feed there. So what are they eating? The number one thing we see them feeding on are stingrays. And we have lots of stingrays in Southern California, hundreds of thousands, if not millions.
Why are they prey? Why are they good prey?
The stingrays we think are good prey because they're easy. They bury in the sand, and their strategy for avoiding predators is to try to remain hidden. These sharks have really good sensors that enable them to detect buried prey. So we call round stingrays, which are so abundant in some cases that they form bands where you can't see sand. They actually completely cover the substrate. Think of that as an all-you-can-eat pancake breakfast for a juvenile white shark, right? So that's an easy capture, super abundant food source. So these are the three reasons why we think they like Southern California beaches. So what we find is these white sharks form these aggregations at a beach. Right now, we have aggregations up to 40 white sharks ranging between 5 and 10 feet long that are using a beach, maybe 2 miles long, for days to weeks to months at a time. So if we have an aggregation of sharks, we can put out an array of these acoustic receivers. And if a tagged shark is detected by 3 or more receivers, we can triangulate a geoposition. So in other words, we can track individuals within that array if the sharks are tagged. Now, the other thing is we use a lot of drones in my lab, and we can fly the drones because the water is shallow, and we can spot these sharks. We can count them. We can estimate their sizes. We can look at their densities, where are they spending all their time, and we can look at what they're doing in proximity to people. That becomes really another important aspect of our research. We have 8 drones in my lab. We can get about 20-minute flight times. We have about 40 batteries. So when we fly a beach, we can fly a beach for 8 hours straight. So the drones are recording video. And then because those drones have GPS devices, we get latitudes and longitudes that are then synced to every frame. So we can use this vast video record to go through and count those sharks, but also look at their position. So one of our questions is, and one of our thoughts is that certain beaches are warmer than others. And a lot of that has to do with tide, current, and topography of that beach. So in order to characterize the environment, we can put temperature data loggers on all these receivers so we can map the temperature on the seafloor. But we also use this device, which is called an autonomous underwater vehicle. It looks like a torpedo. It's about 8 feet long. You can launch it from the beach. You can launch it from a small boat. It is fully autonomous. We can program this to go out and mow the lawn. It's got a set of environmental sensors on its nose, so it can measure chlorophyll, how much plankton is in the water, turbidity. It can measure oxygen concentration. It can measure temperature and depth, and we can map that in this environment in 3D at meter resolution. So by using this technology, we can provide high resolution environmental maps to ask, why are the sharks here and not here? So by using this technology, this is enabling us to ask, how are sharks choosing a hotspot and how long will they be at that hotspot? So to give you an example, here's this hotspot area that we have up off Santa Barbara. Unfortunately, this image got damaged, but there's a shark right here that's being tagged. We've got a bunch of receivers in that area. We can track individuals throughout this area. So here you can see detections throughout the day. Here's a temperature map, a 2D temperature map from the robot that we can do every 2 weeks. We take this robot out, and this is a 8 square kilometer mapped area in 3D that enable us to track those individuals within that space. So now I'm going to show you an animation. This is from 2020. These are the receivers throughout this area. These are all the colors are going to show you different sharks. You're going to see a time and date counter here. Here's only 5 days of data from 8 months of up to 25 sharks that we tracked in this area. So what you can see is that they are using this area constantly. They're just moving back and forth. But when we delve into environmental conditions, there's a rocky reef right here that you can see that the sharks are using during certain times of day. There's a hot spot up here, and there's a rip current right here that the sharks are using during certain times of day. So we're able to map this area in high resolution to ask, how are these sharks, some of them are 8 or 9 feet long, that are staying here for weeks or months at a time. How are they using this habitat? Why are they here? And how long are they going to be here? So by the way, this is the first time this has ever been done on this scale.
What's the typical depth? Are these constantly, are they depth? Do they like certain depths?
Yes. So the transmitters that we have on the sharks have both temperature and depth sensors on them. And what we're finding is that the sharks are near the surface, the top 3 feet during the day, especially in the afternoon when it's warming up. So what's really interesting is that around dawn and dusk is when we find them on the bottom the most. And that's when we think they're probably feeding the most on stingrays, flatfish, things like that. So if we want to get really high resolution data on what those sharks are doing in an aggregation site, that's where we use our smart tags. So remember, this is that Fitbit that we made. So this device has a 3D accelerometer, 3D gyroscope, 3D magnetometer. So it gives us a 3D compass heading and a 3D gyro. It's recording that 30 times a second. This gets clamped onto the shark's dorsal fin like a little backpack. This black thing you see here is a video logger. It gives us up to 12 hours of video footage pointing down the shark's nose so we can see what the shark sees.
Give us the dimensions of this device.
About the size of my hand.
Okay.
So it gets sandwiched on the dorsal fins like a little backpack. It's got an acoustic transmitter so we can follow the shark either from a boat or from an autonomous robot that we've programmed to track the sharks. And then after 24 hours, this thing's designed to pop off, float to the surface. We can pick it up and download it just like we would our Fitbit. Now, when we did this for 3 sharks that we tagged off Long Beach back in 2018, we saw a really interesting video. Like the video was at a 45-degree angle. We thought maybe the shark had jostled the camera and it caused the camera to be moved. But after 20 minutes, we saw the video go 45 degrees in the opposite direction. And then 20 minutes later, it flipped back. So when we looked at the acceleration data, because the accelerometer is measuring the angle and position of the shark 30 times a second, what we found is what the sharks are doing is swimming in a 30-foot diameter circle in a bank like a plane. And they're doing these nice tight circles. And for 20 minutes, they're swimming in the same direction. And then after 20 minutes, they reverse and go the opposite direction. And then after 20 minutes, they reverse and go the opposite direction again. Now, these circles are drifting over time, over depth. And then after 4 hours of this reverse and go back, then the sharks would swim off on a straight path. Two of the 3 sharks that we tagged exhibited this behavior. And what we believe is happening is this behavior of swimming in a circle is analogous to what migratory birds do. So scientists have put little EEG hats on birds that fly continuously. And what they'll do is they'll fly in a circle in one direction. And basically what they're doing is turning off half their brain. While that half of the brain is sleeping, the other half of the brain is on autopilot. And then they reverse and they fly in the opposite direction and turn off the other half of their brain. So we know that whales and dolphins also do this. Now, white sharks must continuously swim in order to breathe. So we believe that this technology has given us the first example of how a white shark may sleep while it's still moving. And it's using the same pattern of behavior that we see in marine mammals and in birds. So one of our other questions, and one of the ones that lifeguards want to know, is how dangerous is it for people to be in the water if there are sharks off these beaches 24/7 for months at a time? So to answer this question, we use drones. I've had a grad student, Patrick Rex, who has flown drone surveys for 2 years at all these sites, all the places where they're accessible airspace, because we can't fly in areas where there are airports and things like that. And basically what he does is he flies along this area so that we can see part of the coastline, because this is where the sharks are. And he'll fly about 500 yards off the beach. So doing this, he can survey the entire beach over the course of a day. And then what we can do is go through the video. We can calculate where people are. We can identify surfers, swimmers, stand-up paddleboarders, waders, boogie boarders, sport fishers, and sharks. We can measure their distance from the wave break, and from the shoreline. So the goal is to try to figure out when are people and sharks in the water together, and what water user is more likely to encounter those sharks. So you can see, based on some of this preliminary data, that most of these sharks are spending most of their time about 200 meters or yards from the wave break, anywhere from the wave break out to about 200 meters offshore. Surfers, stand-up paddleboarders, and swimmers are the ones that are going to interact with these sharks the most. Bodyboarders and waders are going to interact with them the least. So this gives us some data to begin to look at encounter rate. So this is the beach. Think of this as shoreline, right? So this is the average distance of the wave break.
Oh, so that zero is the wave break.
Zero is the wave break, correct.
200 yards offshore.
So this is outside the wave break. This is inside the wave break. Right?
Gotcha.
So you can see, obviously surfers have to swim out, they have to paddle in. That's why we see them all spread throughout this area. But sharks in general are spending most of their time outside the wave break.
Why?
Mainly because they get jostled. So in some places, in some conditions, we do have video footage of sharks in the wave break, but like dolphins, they'll kind of go into the wave, surf it a little bit, and then peel out. By the way, a lot of stingrays are in this zone right here. In this zone, baby, 50 meters outside the wave break. This is where a bulk of their food is. So this is why we think they're using that area. So the other thing that we can do is, because we've accumulated hundreds of hours of video footage, is that we've teamed up with engineers to develop machine learning algorithms to identify objects. Now we can have machine learning algorithms identify swimmers, stand-up paddleboarders, surfers. And this was tricky. We had to actually train the software with thousands and thousands of images that we had to identify, because a surfer sitting on a board looks different than a surfer standing on a board, looks different than a surfer laying on a board. So we had to train the software. Now that the software is trained, the software can successfully identify surfers from stand-up paddleboarders, from boogie boarders, 90% of the time. It can significantly identify white sharks from leopard sharks, from sea lions, from seals, and from dolphins. So now that we have an autonomous system, we can just pump our video footage through that, and it will automatically do those counts for us. One of the challenges is, as we're learning this new information about these sharks, is getting it out to the public. And one of our groups that we work very closely with are kids. So kids are going to the beach. In Southern California, we have over 20,000 junior lifeguards in Southern California alone. So one of the ways that we've gone about educating them about beach safety and sharks are through comic books. So we've developed comic books on beach safety for kids, teaches them about stingrays and sharks and sea jellies, sick marine mammals, rip currents, things like that, in a fun comic book for kids. This comic book was so popular that we also did one on marine pollution to teach kids about marine pollution and how to clean it up. And we're starting a third comic book now, which we're developing on shark spies, about all the technology we use to study sharks. So we've given out over 50,000 paper copies of these comic books. They're now available free online. Anybody can see these on our website. They're available in both English and in Spanish. And all you have to do is type in CSOB Shark Lab comic book, and you can access all of these comic books for free online. So this has become a really powerful tool for us, educating kids about sharks and beach safety. We also have public outreach. We have something we call Shark Shacks. And during the summer, we go to all the public beaches and public ocean piers, educate the public about beach safety and about sharks and about stingrays. Last year, we interacted with almost 10,000 people. This is a great tool that we use in partnership with the lifeguards to help them with their beach safety messaging. In addition, so we have an education program for all the California lifeguards. We have some of the best lifeguards in the world, but they are not marine scientists. So sometimes when lifeguards come out of the water and go, I just saw a shark, they're responsible to investigate. So if they ask the surfer, what did the shark look like? Could they actually identify the shark based on that description? So we help train California lifeguards in marine life ID. We also teach them how to interpret shark behavior. So for example, if every time an 8-foot white shark was seen off a beach, they had to close the beaches would never be open in some places. So teaching them how to interpret the behavior, like for example, this behavior of this juvenile white shark is as relaxed as a white shark can get. So if you're out surfing and you see a shark exhibiting that kind of behavior, you really have nothing to worry about. So this shark is moving very slowly, very lazily. This is what we typically see of most of the shark activity of juvenile white sharks along Southern California beaches. This is, I'm just walking down the street kind of behavior, right? Very different from aggressive behavior. So aggressive behavior, when a shark is jazzed up and it's in feeding mode, it moves very quickly, it moves erratically.
What speed was he going there, that picture?
Swimming speed?
Yeah, 4 miles an hour, 3 miles an hour?
Not even that, less than a mile an hour.
Okay.
Very, very slowly. So a lot of surfers see sharks moving like this. And we always tell them, look, if you see it, even if the fin's breaking the surface, that's a chilled out shark. You really don't have to worry much about that. If you see a fin rapidly coming to you and then veering off and moving away and rapidly coming in and getting closer, that is a shark that's acting aggressively. And what you need to do is you always keep your eye on the shark and you start backing up. So always point your surfboard at the shark, let the shark know you see it, and you start backing up. Think of the nose of your board as the head of the animal. So if the shark knows it's being spotted and you're backing off, you can calm things down quite often.
When you say point your surfboard, you mean you're sitting on the surfboard in the water and you see the dorsal fin coming toward you, turn it around to face the shark and paddle backwards slowly.
That's correct.
Okay.
Let the shark know you can see it. If it's swimming around you, swimming by you, move it as the shark goes by.
Face it.
Always face the shark.
Right. Okay. Now, when it's going slowly, is it just looking, just kind of lollygagging along, hunting for things to eat?
No, there are a lot of times when we don't think they're doing anything. They're just there. So they're calling that home. And like when we're at home, we're not always doing things. Sometimes we're just sitting, right? So a lot of times we see this behavior for hours and hours on end, where the sharks are just swimming back and forth, kind of doing laps at a beach.
How often do they eat, and what does it matter how much they're eating on the frequency?
So we don't know that yet. And we're doing experiments right now to try to answer that. So we see them doing it kind of periodically. We know based on some of the acceleration data and some of the tracking data that dawn and dusk may be the feeding times that they're feeding on stingrays in particular. But other bigger prey, we just don't know. And we don't know how often they have to feed. All I can tell you is that their metabolism is much lower than ours. So we eat 3+ meals a day because our metabolism is high. Theirs is a third of ours. So they might only have to eat maybe every 2 or 3 days, or very small meals every day.
When you're in the water and you see it coming toward you, you turn so your board is facing it. That means your legs are in the water. Do you get your legs out of the water and stay on top of the board? What's the best thing to do?
Yeah, we always tell people to pull your legs up if you can. Pull your arms up if you can. You don't want anything dangling.
Okay.
But you, at the same time, you want to move your board in a way so you're always facing it. So you might have to have your arms in the water to do that.
Okay.
Again, if the shark gets close, you pull your arms and legs up.
Okay, got it. And how often is he going to bite the nose of the surfboard, the shark?
Rarely. I mean, we rarely hear about those things. So for cases where surfers have seen sharks, they rarely actually have a situation where they've actually had the shark come either bump the board or bite. All of this work, recent work, has been funded by the state of California. We received funding in 2018 to expand our research and education program. We're now doing work up in Monterey and off Morro Bay. We're starting to do more work up further up north. State of California has funded a lot of this work. Monterey Bay Aquarium was a big funder. And of course, we have lots of private donors that support us. This is very expensive work. And as you can see from our research partners, they include lots of universities, public aquaria, institutes, and then of course, basically all beach cities are our supporters.
What's your annual budget?
We probably are at about $800,000 to $900,000 a year to run this program.
And how many full-time and how many part-time folks?
10 full-time and about 15 part-time.
And how many volunteers?
80.
And when people want to come and help you and support your work, where's the webpage?
You just type in www.csulb.edu/shark-lab. So there's lots of education information here about beach safety, our education programs, and our outreach. There's lots of information about all our different research that we've done, information about our team. And then, of course, for people that want to donate, there's a hot button right there.
How long does give us the age of sharks and the size range?
So most of the sharks that we see in Southern California beaches are anywhere from newborns. And remember, they're newborn at about 4.5 feet long. And then most of the juveniles we see are probably up to 6 or 7 feet, or 6 or 7 years old. They grow about a foot a year for their first 6 years or so. And then what's really interesting is we don't know where the teens are. So, the juveniles act like babies until they're about 9 feet long, and then they become highly mobile, and we're not really sure where they go. We know a lot about adults from my colleagues at Stanford that have done a lot of tagging at the Farallones and Tamales Point, places like that. And we've learned a lot about the babies. We don't know a lot about the teenagers.
We saw breeding grounds. It used to be the people who talked about great whites breeding in the Farallones. Was that obsolete information? What's going on with breeding grounds near the Farallones?
Yeah, so we actually don't know where they mate. So that's still kind of a mystery.
Okay.
So we know that they aggregate at places there because there's food.
Okay.
And what's interesting is that the Farallones, it's predominantly males. There's not a lot of females there. At Guadalupe Island, we see lots of males in the summer and early fall, And then there's some males, but then all the big females show up. So there's a very short window when males and females are there together. So we know that from tagging that the adults in the winter migrate out to the middle of the Pacific or go to Hawaii. And then about 8 months later, the males will come back to the aggregation sites where they'll feed. Females will come back in the spring about every other year to give birth, or will go to those feeding aggregation sites in the winter.
Do they give birth in the same place that they were born, where they spawn? We don't know. Okay.
We don't know. That's still a mystery.
And the typical lifespan?
We believe up to 70 years old. Think of them
70.
having a lifespan like humans.
70.
Yep.
And the predators of theirs, what are their predators? Orca.
Yep. So adult white sharks will eat juveniles. So they're cannibalistic. They'll eat their young. And that's why we think they use nurseries, because that reduces the probability of eating your babies, right?
And how does the nursery work? How does it protect the babies?
We think it's because it's shallow. Big things don't go there. So those shallow beaches become safe for them. There's fewer adults.
Now, orcas are about the same size as the sharks. So why is it that orcas are predators of the same size shark?
I think a lot of that comes down to skill, right? So they're warm-bodied, so they're more powerful than a white shark. The huge brain, very smart, and they work together. So they work as a team. So you got a white shark, relatively primitive animal, warm-bodied. So as long as it's swimming, it can keep its body warmer than the water, which enables it to take down marine mammals. But it's not nearly as cooperative, social, and probably as smart as an orca.
And so smartness in the case of a predator, how does it use a pair or its social skills to hunt successfully?
So when we see orcas feeding on seals and things like that, or dolphins, they totally work as a team. They herd them. They'll take turns going in, wearing them down. They'll either smack them, so they're very cooperative. They're very smart, and they communicate, right? So they can echolocate underwater and talk to each other. We have no indication that sharks can do that, right? They're solitary. So that, despite the fact that this white shark has this great reputation as being this amazing top predator, the only thing else in the ocean that's truly oceanic that can kill them are orca. And then, of course, humans. But we're not aquatic.
What about whales?
There is evidence of white sharks trying to kill calves of humpbacks and things like that, or gray whales. And it's likely that big females can, beat up a white shark if they came in. So they'll defend them, sure.
How do they do it since they don't have teeth? How does a whale defend?
Because one good slam from a tail could probably kill a white shark. I mean, people forget how powerful those animals are.
So now, while most of our talk has been incredibly educational, and most of it's talking about the characteristics of the white sharks, there's this primitive feeling that sharks are dangerous. Which of the sharks are the most dangerous to human beings?
Well, I mean, if we look at the records, like how many people have been bitten,
Yes.
right? White sharks are kind of at the top of that list in terms of species responsible for the most bites on humans. Followed by tiger sharks and bull sharks. And those are three of the largest of what we would call large predator sharks. So in many cases, we just assume that because of that feeding behavior, because of that nature, and the fact that they occur in the same places with humans, that the probability of making mistaking a human for a prey item goes up, right? And because when you get to be that big, if you're threatened by these objects, you're less worried by those objects. So in other words, not all bites on humans have to be predation related. Some of those bites could be a white shark trying to defend itself. And they know that they can successfully do that because they're larger than us. So their fear of being injured is less.
When you see sharks with your drones, do you give a notice to the lifeguards? What do you do?
So we used to. So when we were flyer surveys, the rule that we had is anytime we saw a shark within 100 yards of a human, we would notify the lifeguards. Then we had these aggregations where we were calling the lifeguards like 4 or 5 times an hour. And they were like, stop. We know the sharks are out there. You don't need to do that anymore. And they post signs. They just let people know. Now in Southern California, anytime a surfer sees a drone above them, they all know that there's probably a shark around, because that's usually what the drones are there to film.
What do they do when they see the drone? What's the behavior of the surfer? Get out of the water?
No, they just wave.
Smile. Okay, so now when you go to sleep at night, do you dream about sharks, Chris?
Yeah, sometimes I do. Yeah, they're amazing animals. I really, really love working with them. And the funny thing is, when I was younger, I said I would never work on white sharks. I thought they were overrated. They got way too much credit. And it wasn't actually until I started working on the young ones, the babies, and I thought, these things are actually kind of cute. And it changed my mind about white shark. I never thought I would be a white shark researcher, but here I am. Never say never, I guess, is the thing.
So when kids want to come and study, be part of the Cal State University Long Beach Shark Lab, do they apply to be part of the Shark Lab? What do they do?
Yeah, so there's lots of opportunities. So for example, now with our education program, we have a science education director who runs our education program. By the way, we do outreach for K through 12. We have a virtual program, which is really awesome. We have volunteers all the time that help, some of whom help us with our virtual program. So you don't even have to be in Southern California to help. We have a high school intern program, and we actually have interns that come from all over the country to come intern in our program, and they help with research. So they get to learn a little bit about what it's like to be a marine biologist. They get to help with our outreach and education programs. For undergrads, our marine bio program is a big draw. We draw students from all over the country, all over the world. And a lot of those students volunteer in the Shark Lab and get to help. Some of them get to do research as undergrads. And then, of course, graduate students, we recruit from all over the world. So it's a fun program. We really want to get people out in the field. And we use a lot of technology. So I always tell students, look, brush up on your computer chops, make sure your math is up to date, because we use that all the time. And now with our technology, with machine learning and video technology and all these electronics, if you're not familiar with that, it's hard to do this job.
Give me a misunderstanding about sharks. Something that people are wrong about with sharks.
So the number one is people think if you see a shark, if a shark's near you, it's going to bite you. We have hundreds of hours of video footage to prove that that's not the case. We have video footage of 10-foot white shark swimming right underneath the surfer who doesn't even know the shark's there. Like it's not even, like the person's not even there. We think a lot of times, in most cases, these sharks are so used to being around people that they just consider humans flotsam.
Are we not fatty enough for them? What do they
Well,
like?
that could be. Or they've become accustomed to people, and they know what people are, and they know what a seal is, and they know we're not that. They're actually fairly intelligent animals. They have fairly decent sized brains.
What size?
Good sensory equipment that help them interpret things pretty well.
Give us some metrics about brain size and or intelligence.
So sharks have brain sizes relative to their body sizes that are equivalent to some mammals or birds, which is big. So, but most of that brain is dedicated to senses. It's dedicated to their vision, to their smell, their hearing, their ability to detect electric fields. So a lot of that brain isn't necessarily dedicated to writing sonnets. It's mostly dedicated to interpreting sensory information, which makes them good predators, right? So that is why we struggle to understand why sharks occasionally bite people. My personal feeling is that when bites occur on humans, that a majority of those are mistakes. The animal made a mistake. And when you see how many times we see sharks in and amongst people, the only thing I can tell you is sharks make mistakes less than we do. Because there are lots of opportunities for them to make those mistakes. We just don't see it.
What about colors of wetsuits? Is there any colors that are safer than others?
That's a great question. Turns out white sharks are colorblind. They can't see the same colors we do. So those colors don't matter. What they're seeing, they have pretty good high contrast vision, so they can make out silhouettes very well. But they're not seeing the same colors. So if you think a fancy wetsuit is going to protect you, it's probably not.
Are certain boards safer than other boards? Are bigger boards safer, littler boards safer?
There's no scientific data to suggest that one or the other. What we have seen in recent years, which is interesting, is an increase in bites on kayaks. And in fact, in some cases, those are now passing surfboards. So we don't know why they're biting kayaks. It could be part of the sound. It could be the rhythmic splashing of paddling. We're not really sure. The colors vary, so it doesn't look like an orange kayak is preferred over a yellow kayak or a green kayak. There doesn't appear to be a color difference, but we are seeing an increase in bites on kayaks.
Are they biting the bow of the kayak, the stern of the kayak, the narrow part? How?
It varies. They can bite the bow. Sometimes they're hitting from beneath and catching the edge. Sometimes people are getting knocked out of the water, but then they're able to get back in the kayak and the shark goes away. So we're not really sure why those bites occur. In some cases, there are fishers fishing and they do have bloody fish in the kayak. Those kayaks have drain holes and they're putting blood in the water. So it could be the sharks thinking, well, could be a meal. I don't know. I'm going to go over and take a little nibble.
I remember when getting scuba instruction 20 years or so ago, the instructor said, when the shark comes toward you and you're underwater, he said, take the back of your knife, the handle of it, and try to hit the shark straight on the nose as snout as comes in. Talk to me about that.
We always tell people, listen, if a shark is that close or if a shark is biting you, that is exactly what you do. You fight back. And the place to hit it is in its nose. So its nose is a very sensitive area. Its eyes are sensitive. So you poke it in the eye, you bang it in the nose. If you can stick your hand in its gills, you grab its gills. Those are all sensitive areas and they will get the shark to release. If a shark is really close and getting a little too close to comfort, good pop in the nose is usually enough to dissuade them. Right?
So not a stab, but the back handle, a hit, a hard like that.
Yep.
So he's not damaged and there's no blood in the water, but instead he knows that's nothing I want to touch.
Exactly. Just like if somebody popped you in the nose, your eyes start to water, you become a little disoriented. You're like, that's same is probably true for a shark.
Right. So Chris, it's been completely fascinating speaking with a person who is, pardon the pun, but consumed by shark enthusiasm. And I'm happy that our Wednesday Yachting Luncheon audience gets a chance to listen to all that you've been able to share with us. We wish you great continued success with the, Cal State Long Beach famous Shark Lab. And thanks so much for being our guest on the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.
Great. Thank you. And enjoy the water.
This has been a presentation of the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.